Ask yourself, what are you doing now to help you improve in the future? What is up, everyone? Welcome back for another week's video. First video of 2021 and the first in a series of videos I'm going to be making over the next month called the off season, which is going to be focused on some different things you can do during this kind of like winter downtime when perhaps you're not kayaking, or if you're like me, you're not kayaking as much, to get ready for spring kayaking and to be as well prepared as you can be given that you are not kayaking. Now, with that being said, the best way to be kind of ready for kayaking is kayaking more. And it's not to say that it's impossible to kayak in Canada right now, but it's just colder than I want to go kayaking. Like, I know there's still people out on the river right now, which is great, good for them. It's very cold here, in my opinion, and I personally don't feel like I get a lot out of those sessions when you're going down the river and you're just trying to avoid getting wet. It's so cold and the water's freezing to you and stuff. Like, cool. It's not what I want to do. I don't feel like I'm benefiting from it, and there's other things I'm going to be doing during this off season I wanted to share with you guys, which I think it's going to be somewhat useful for being ready for kayaking when spring rolls around. And that leads me up nicely to what this episode is going to be all about. We're going to be talking about goal setting. What is it? Why is that important? To put it simply, if you don't have a goal, how are you ever going to score, right? Like if you don't know what you're trying to achieve or where you're trying to get to, it's difficult to know if you're making progress or if you're going backwards. And goal setting is a really good way of putting qualifiers or quantifiers onto statements like, well, I want to be better at kayaking. And what does that mean? You know, like if people say like, well, this year I'm really going to try and do better at my kayaking, that could mean anything from like, I want to be able to roll every single time I go upside down to like, by the end of the year, I want to have run a 100-foot waterfall. Now, that's quite a wide spectrum of goals, and if you haven't done some accurate goal setting, it's going to be difficult to achieve whichever end of that spectrum you're on, right? Like if you are at a point where you're like, I want to be able to roll my kayak every time I go upside down, goal setting can help you get there, right? That's an example of a specific quantifiable goal. If you're not using these like identifiable, quantifiable goals, then you might not notice when you're actually slipping or your roll percentage starts to drift backwards into being less good, right? So that's why goal setting is really important, because it can help you figure out where you're at and where you're going and how you're going to get there. And I think that how step is the most important thing about goal setting. The way I like to do goal setting is I use the SMART goals acronym, which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time sensitive. I think that's it. I'd have to Google that maybe. Basically, this is a little formula that you can apply to your goal setting, whether it's for short, medium, or long-term goals. You can apply the same acronym, and if you were listening carefully right at the start of this video, I introduced it using a SMART target. So if you listen back carefully, this video of 2021 and the first in a series of videos I'm going to be making over the next month called the off season, which is going to be focused on some different things you can do during this kind of like winter downtime when perhaps you're not kayaking, or if you're like me, you're not kayaking as much, to get ready for spring kayaking and to be as well prepared as you can be given that you are not kayaking. It was specific in that I shared what I wanted to achieve. It was measurable in that there will either be a bunch of videos over the next 4 to 6 weeks or there won't be. So that's like a measurability category. It was achievable in that it's something that I'm realistically able to deliver. And it had that time constraint of over the next few weeks. So like, you know, probably on every Monday like normal, but probably over that next 4 to 6 Mondays, kind of gives us a frame that we're working in, right? So we can see this is a fairly short-term goal, hopefully to help share some of the things that I'm actually doing during my off-season training to get ready for spring kayaking that you might want to think about putting into your spring preparation, off-season training, I guess what we'll call these videos. So while I think it's really good to have these specific targets, and that might be, like I mentioned earlier, like just being able to roll your kayak every time and then taking the steps on how you're going to get there, There's also examples of bad goal setting, not following, or maybe following that same SMART acronym, but not following it in a way which is taking into account all the factors. So for example, if you had set yourself a goal of wanting to paddle a certain river, that's a solid goal, right? It's specific, it's measurable, it's realistic. But the thing you have to take into account is there's like environmental factors that maybe are going to make that not realistic. So if, for example, your goal is to paddle a certain river, but then that river only runs one day a year and you haven't been able to schedule yourself so that you can be there during that one day, or maybe it doesn't even run that year, maybe there's not enough rain or too much rain, or it stays in too high or too low or whatever, no one goes down it that year. You do have to take into account like environmental factors if your goal is something like that example, or there could be other examples, I guess, where there's factors that are going to be out of your control, and that's an example I call bad goal setting. Like, I try not to set goals which are going to have a lot of uncontrollable factors. I'm only looking to do my goal setting on things which I'm able to roughly control or mostly control, so that I'm going to realistically get to a result or get close to a result, so that sets me up for the next thing. Like I mentioned, goal setting is really useful for long-term goals, but it's also good for medium and short-term stuff too. And quite often a smart strategy is to take those big long-term pieces that you're looking for and then break them down into smaller, shorter-term chunks. And that helps you figure out if you're making progress towards where you're going, and gives you these little milestones to aim for along the way. So if your goal is to be able to roll your kayak every time by the end of your kayaking season, whenever that is, in November or December, or that's longer term, right? So you might want to be going to a pool session every week and hitting 20 or 30 rolls, and then slowly over those, that first 4 weeks of pool sessions, you're trying to get your roll like success percentage up from like 50% of the time to like 80% of the time to 100% of the time in the pool, and then you can transfer that onto your next goal, which is maybe going to be like taking that pool roll into somewhere safe where you can practice it in moving water, and then you're doing a certain amount of those each week, and then you're trying to get that percentage up from 50% successful to higher and higher and higher, until you're eventually at a point where you can get flipped upside down unexpectedly in a rapid and roll back up immediately. And it might take you, if you were just shooting at that long-term goal but without those short-term milestones that you've broken down from that long-term goal, you might not get there, or you might get distracted or kind of off course. And I think that's why a lot of people can't stick with New Year's resolutions, because they make them too unrealistic and they don't have short-term markers that they're going for that build towards those longer term goals, right? So that's not to say that you can only build short-term goals from longer term goals. You can build longer term goals on top of your shorter term goals, working in the other direction. Like that can be a solution too. But if we think about taking those longer term goals and then breaking them down into shorter term milestones, that can be a really useful way to track your progress for where you're going and have smaller, more achievable chunks of work to do in that time frame. So you might want to break your year's worth of goals down into 4 quarters, and then your 4 quarters breaks down into 12 weeks, and now you might have 12 small goals. You're trying to hit one every week. The other thing to say with those is you've got to make sure that they're actually achievable within that time frame, and you're in that nice window where you're not bored but you're not overexerted. You're just kind of in that perfect like flow state window. A really good book about flow state, as a little aside here, is called Rise of Superman, Decoding Ultimate Human Performance, which I highly recommend. It's a sports science book about flow state and kind of getting there and controlling that more often. And that's that feeling where everything else is kind of like out of your way and you're just really focused in on what it is you're doing, which is a lot of, for me, it's what I experience a lot when I'm kayaking, and it is a really interesting book. It's one of the best books I read in 2018, so check that out. And the final thing I wanted to say about goal setting, and the thing which I've found to be most impactful for me, is having an accountability partner, and that's having someone else who is aware of what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve. And that person might not even be on the same set of goals as you. It's helpful if they are. But that person might not even be on the same set of goals as you, but someone who can check in with you, face to face or on the phone or by text message to say, hey, how are you making progress on whatever your specific goal is? And if you know, maybe it can be reciprocal, like you can check in on them on whatever their goals are, and you each know each other's goals. And it's just having someone who you can say, hey, like, I did what I had to do this week, or I did what I had to do today, or I did what I had to do this month. And that makes such a huge difference. Like, I've noticed it with my fitness. Having an accountability partner through 2020 was a huge upside to me. Like, I was a lot more consistent. I worked a lot harder. In previous years when I've been doing kind of like fitness orientated stuff, I always tend to like start really hard and then drop off for a bit, the same way as how people join gyms in January and the gym's really busy, and then if you go back to the same gym by like March 20th, it's probably pretty empty, or there's like a few new people from the start of the year. But most people have dropped off, probably because they either didn't have a smart target, a smart goal, or they didn't have an accountability person who was pushing them to show up 5 times a week, 3 times a week, once a week, however much they were trying to show up. And so that's one of the biggest, most impactful things I've found with my goal setting, is to have someone who can check in on you and just say, hey, like, how are you getting on? And if you're not meeting your goals, say, hey, why haven't you done this? What's holding you back? What can we change to help you get where you're going, right? And you need to be able to do that for someone else too. And that's kind of, you know, the circle goes around. And so yeah, this has been episode 1, fitting, I think, for kind of the first week of the new year. But like, set some goals, make them realistic, make them achievable, set a time frame, get an accountability partner, put it all together, and then start smashing it. That's kind of all I've got for this week, the off-season episode 1. I will see you next week in episode 2. Till then, let's set some goals, and I will see you then. Peace.